this is like a different thing now, but
It is and
yeah.
it isn't, right?
Yeah. But no, I'm glad we are. It was like really haunting me. Every now and again, I would like remember your email and be like, "Oh fuck, I need to like get on top of that." So I'm glad we're doing this.
Absolutely, man. I'm glad that we're able to connect here for sure. You were one of the first people I wanted to reach out to when we started the new podcast to get back on. And so, yeah, definitely glad that you're here and appreciate your time.
Oh yeah, well it's a pleasure. I've really had fun. Last time we spoke, I think that was like, I don't know. It was one I distinctly remember having like a good time on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man,
it
I
was.
remember.
It's funny because that was one of my, not to cut you off there, buddy,
You're
but
good.
that's one of my go-to favorite episodes of the last project.
Oh really?
Yeah. Whenever people would be like, "Hey, what do you recommend?" Which is funny because it's hard to recommend like anything because I feel like podcasts are so like disposable, like
Mhm.
they can be a lot of the time. It's like so current events, but
Yeah.
that was kind of one of my go-tos.
Oh yeah, well, that's really flattering. I'm glad that it's a well liked episode.
Yeah. I mean, I at least hope so. Yeah, but yeah, man. I mean, fucking God. I think that was God. That must have been at least 2 years ago now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a while. I can't believe how long it's been. Like I'm in some kind of psychological denial about how long I've spent on Twitter because
For
to me
real.
it still feels like 2 years or something, and like who knows how long it's been now.
God. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think I remember seeing you on there. I mean, not to make you feel worse, but I feel like I remember seeing you on there probably like 5 years ago. I mean, all of us basically.
Yeah.
I think we all kind of got on roughly around the same time.
Hmm.
I started this account during the pandemic.
Okay.
I'm not sure if my maths
It's
is
about 3.5 years ago now.
yeah, something
which is
like that, right?
I mean, I
wild to think
overshot a
about.
little bit there.
Yeah. But I understand though because like our sense of time is so well, mine is anyway. It's like so kind of like amorphous
Mhm.
and yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrible. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like nobody wants to acknowledge that. As a quick side note, this is totally boring, but COH, am I sounding okay? My
You're
fucking,
still coming in a little hot. I mean, I don't think you're
it's funny. I
clipping
feel like
anymore.
such an asshole because like my microphone is like a foot away from my fucking head. I just talk too loud or something.
How am
You're fine,
how am I
man.
sounding?
You're good, Yeerk.
All right, cool.
Yeah, you're sounding totally fine.
I think you're gonna be fine, Sly.
How?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is close. I want to. Is this louder?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, dude. New project. Okay. Anyways, I'm just gonna talk to my mic across the fucking room, which basically defeats the purpose of having a nice microphone. But whatever. God damn it! What was I even saying? Oh no,
Time.
the COVID time warp has made us all into like it's like asking a woman how old she is. Like none of us really want to acknowledge the time that has passed at this point. I feel like, but yeah, it's fucking crazy. I feel like I'm one of the cases where I think I generally made pretty good use of the time and pushed my life forward generally, but it's that's definitely not the case for a lot of people.
I think when it started, it was really great. Like in terms of how I was using the time,
Mm-hmm.
and then there were ups and downs. I probably could have done a better job. If I could do it all over again, which I did not want to do.
Oh no.
But it could have been a lot. Like just in terms of like how I spent my time, it could have been a lot worse. But it also could have been a lot better. That's
Yeah,
probably the average person's assessment.
you bake a lot of sourdough and such like that.
My dad has been baking a lot of sourdough, but I haven't figured out the sourdough.
Oh, that was a big trend there at the beginning of COVID, man.
Yeah,
I
it
remember
was-
all those little things.
We made like we did some puzzling. We put together some
Oh,
puzzles.
yeah.
We watched a lot of movies together, like me and the family and stuff. I started exercising a bit more. I read a lot.
Nice.
Good, yeah.
It was, It's just like it was just hard in the winter. The winter months were the worst, I think.
Oh yeah, man. It's
You
like
know?
you're locked inside. You can't really go out. It's like you can't go out socially, but then you also don't want to go outside because it's so cold. Like to get the little
Yeah.
reprieve you can get from being inside all day. So you just feel kind of trapped. There's a real cabin fever kind of feeling to
Totally.
the whole COVID experience.
Yeah.
I remember in the beginning kind of being gleeful because it felt like a free pass to kind of just continue
Yeah.
like an extended adolescence and just be like I can just kind of like have a sick day where I stay home from work
Mhm.
but for indefinitely and then I think that was actually really helpful
Definitely.
and just
I think
go ahead.
I think everyone kind of needs that. Like, I think we're pushed to the brink, kind of, in normal interactions in normal society, like with work, the 40-hour work week or more, if you're, trying to really make ends meet, and with all the just kind of things that modernity puts on us, like the deluge and all the overstimulation. I think a lot of people just need a breakup for a little while, and I think that that's kind of what it felt like at first, like a positive outlook on it. It's like, oh yeah, dude, I'm getting 2 weeks off work, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. It's gonna flatten out, and then I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna get, gonna get paid for the time I was gone, and it's just kind of like a nice reset. I mean, obviously, it didn't turn out that way, and it ended up being much longer, and then kind of a whole dark thing. But I think it was I kind of welcomed it initially, and then after it settled into it and it looked like this is really going to be a whole fucking thing, I kind of tried to use it a little bit as like a reset, like a great reset, if you will, in my own personal life, where I was like, I lost my job because it closed down because of the extended COVID break and stuff, and so it was like a time where I was forced to kind of reevaluate some things, and I think that was healthy for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like just kind of like seeing it through to seeing how much I could maxing out on the free time. I think was just like, oh, okay, yeah, this just isn't what I want to do.
Yeah.
Well, I think in the early days, at least in the UK, there was a bit of like this excitement where it felt like we were having a kind of like a bit of a sense of what it would have been like during World War II or something, right? Where it's like, oh, there's this kind of global emergency and we can all like come together and sort of do our bit. And that actually felt really nice. And I think that there was a general kind of like public goodwill. And then like, 6 months later, at least in my case, all of that goodwill had been like completely evaporated because of just this like, like horrible like nudge management like approach to trying to influence people's behavior and just the constant like media churn of which I've gone on about before of like just like these kind of like discontinuous like quote unquote scientific news stories with updates, but there was no sense of like historical knowledge building on building across time. It was like each new piece of information would just overwrite the previous like it never happened. And I think that like really it like I don't think that like the default person's attitude towards a kind of international emergency or like a global emergency like this that requires some kind of like temporary sacrifice of like of like individual freedom or whatever, in the sense of like going to the pub or whatever. Like I don't think that people are innately hostile towards that kind of thing if they if they have like an investment in it and they have a kind of confidence and an assurance that they're not going to be fucked around, because then they're like, that's like when people are actually functioning as a society, when we're capable of like determining to make these choices and go along with them for ourselves. But I just think the whole thing was so like, the whole like this kind of the rise of this like cultural construction of like expertise is just like inherently structurally alienating. So there is just no goodwill because there's just this intense like you can feel the kind of like seething contempt and resentment that the people who are the kind of like public face of that, like, that sort of expert class. You can see how much like contempt they hold the average person
Yeah.
in, you know. And they're like oblivious to it. So it's just kind of like, well, you know, why should anybody respect what you have to say or do anything that you want them to do when, you know, like, yeah, it's just, there's no two way.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like I feel like that's kind of one of the normie takes is just kind of like, oh, we all thought maybe we could have something where, you know, it would be a test and see if we could all be in it together on something, and we all know how that went, and like I 100% agree with you, where like I think that especially in the beginning, because it's one of these things where people forget that like in the beginning, the sides were kind of completely switched.
Yeah.
Right. The sides were completely switched. And then there was like a little overlap time there where like everyone kind of was in agreement. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's totally a white pill, because I think that it's two things. Like, I think that people totally have a really strong instinct for like civic responsibility. And I mean, that's how I'm going to put it, like civic responsibility. And then also just like everyone's so fucking hungry for just like a meta narrative, like something, you know, you compared it to like World War II, right?
Yeah.
It's like something that actually fucking a punctuation mark in history that makes us feel like we're fucking somewhere and we're doing something. And there's chapters.
Like specifically the Blitz, because the way the Blitz is like taught to like, you know, British kids is as this kind of moment of like, you know, community cohesiveness in the face of a kind of national threat. You know, so I mean, I don't know the extent to which that's been like, you know, it probably has been like exaggerated a little bit or like mythologized. I can't really say because I wasn't there, but,
right.
But like, you know, that was, I think that there was this idea that would be the kind of template for the situation, right?
Yeah.
But I think that when, you know, you're actually faced with this kind of serious thing, there is just this natural kind of like, all the bullshit of everyday life kind of falls away, and you're like, okay, like I need to like focus on, you know, my family's well-being or whatever, you know, I need to go. So they're just like, you know, it lends a bit of excitement to like going and buying some tinned food or something, right? Because you feel like you're creating a nice little stockpile. I don't know, like I think that they're really sort of, people got a taste of a sort of level of responsibility, you know, that
I remember right in the beginning, I kind of had this point in it where I was like, this like needs to be like a shifting point in my life, you know?
Yeah, totally.
I like did that, and I was like, and I remember like talking to like my now fiance about it, and just being like, you know, one of the worst possible things that can come from this is if shit just like continues on like normal, right? And that's like kind of exactly what happened in all the worst ways, at least. But you know, I think that there were like a lot of opportunities and a lot of people that like did do good shit. Like I'm not saying this to fucking jerk myself off about it by any measure or anything, but like I like, you know, went and like ran errands for my like elderly neighbors and shit like that, right?
Yeah,
and
stuff like that's nice. It's like rewarding, you know.
No, exactly. Like it's a reward in itself, right? And I don't know. It's just interesting. I think that people are robbing themselves of like a positive look on things when they look at COVID as like this. It was proof of a failure in our civic instincts, as opposed to like, no, it's like a failure in like the system's ability to create consensus now.
Yeah, or to capitalize in a positive way on those civic instincts. Yeah.
And it's also just like, you know, the kind of people who like make those complaints about other people, to me, do not seem, you know, I mean, I don't know what the fuck they may have been doing. You know, if they were going and like delivering shopping for their elderly neighbors or whatever, like you were, then that's, you know, that's like pretty unimpeachable. But just as in terms of like expressing a kind of like a sort of civic sentiment, I don't think of those people as like having any sense of like social solidarity with anybody else. Like I just feel like they are interested in appearing like superior, and they kind of appoint themselves to this like role of like a kind of overseer or, or something like that, right? And it's just like, fuck off. Like again, all of this stuff, it just has to be built on a kind of foundation of like mutual respect. And like, and a lot of those people have these ideas of like that, there are just these various dimensions of modern life that are basically disposable, and you can just kind of jettison them, like well past the point at which I think that was, ever necessary. And it's just like, oh yeah, do you really need to go to a bar, or do you need to go to a restaurant or something like that? It's like, actually, I do think that people fucking need to go to a bar sometime. Like, people need to go to the pub.
Right.
People need that like social space, or like these things aren't like disposable and unimportant. They're actually important,
Right.
like dimensions of social and like civic life.
Yeah, and you can maybe
so...
even have a critique of like people. You could say that it's not that necessary. It's more important to work together to fight this, spread of COVID or whatever. But you could also do it from an ingenuous way, of saying like, yeah, I know this is important. Actually, it's good to socialize. People need public spaces to socialize, etc., and not just discount the whole time like, oh, you're stupid for wanting to go and see other people. You're stupid for not wanting to do this. You're just a bad person because you want to go to the bar after 4 months of being in your house alone. Like, they didn't have to have that that disingenuous kind of approach that you're talking about, where it's like, not actually built on mutual respect. They could have maybe even framed it in a more positive way towards their ends, by respecting the fact that these things are important for social well-being and for individuals.
Well, and that's one of the interesting things too, I think, is like COH and I have talked about this a pretty decent amount, but like the obsession that people have with like mental health, while simultaneously just always reducing it down to just chemical components, as opposed to like the side that's constantly the most sensitive to depression, and you need to get help, seeking the help you need and everything. It's always just market mediated shit. It's always lowering stigma for taking a fucking drug or something, and then they're calling you a chud for like wanting to go to church or go to a fucking restaurant.
It's just like a like a therapeutic ideology that everybody has. Like just the average metropolitan, kind of like, I don't know, like middle class metropolitan individual who like participates in like popular culture and popular discourse. That's just like the stuff that's around, like in terms of, like mass media and all the kind of sentiments that we encounter every day. And it's just this like, I think we were just like really heavily saturated with it, especially like during the late 2010s. So it really is just kind of like the dominant overarching conceptualization of like how to deal with emotions, how to deal with difficult times, how like the mind works and how emotions work and how all these things fit together. It just rests on all these kind of like, I don't know, all these sort of assumptions about how these things will fit together that I just don't think are necessarily true.
No, they're not.
And often it's just like, you will see people talking about like their mental health issues or whatever, but it's kind of, you can kind of see it's like, well, there may be, what's actually going on here isn't really what you're describing.
Right.
No, 100%. People
other stuff.
People want to talk about it like it's a broken carburetor in their car or something, and it's like, it's this very like, and I get it to a certain extent of like, I think people like to, okay, it's like on one hand they oversimplify it by liking to have just this literal manual that you can flip open and be like, okay, this on page 45, that page 45 explains just my entire condition. right, and just what is wrong with my life, and that kind of oversimplifies it, and then kind of in an ironic flip, a lot of the time, like the problem and the solution is simpler than they always insist, right? Because it doesn't need to just be this like really opaque, you were talking about like expert, just even having just reality mediated by experts for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a licensed professional. That's a thing that I constantly hear when people talk about therapy, is they say like talking to a licensed professional. They always, the word professional.
That's just because, like, that's almost like a rhetorical thing. When if you're like trying to own somebody, right? Then there's a certain. I know this because I also abuse it, because like there's you can kind of figure out if you're trying to like dunk on somebody and be like rhetorically impressive to add a bit of sting to it, then you can like throwing in a few extra unnecessary syllables is like a good way to add a kind of like wry sarcastic like effect to it, right? So like there's this kind of thing of being like, like these sort of phrases that people refer to, like, oh, you need to go and see a licensed professional, like it's kind of like, but the problem is though, as with all things like that, if people say them enough, then they just kind of seep in and they become actually meant.
Well, that's all of this stuff. That's all this stuff, right? Because I think like it's bit by bit by bit by bit to where you've over the course of enough years you've departed so far from where you started, and it's not that any of this stuff really has like a lot of like merit on its own. It's just that there's just so much fucking repetition, right?
Well, it's just the thing that I've been thinking about recently, right? It's just that like there is just such a lack of like conceptual literacy regarding so many things, like like science, for example, or like mental health is another really, really good example. And what I mean by conceptual literacy is just like understanding, like people don't understand that mental illnesses are like conceptual objects. They're not like real things. They are like terms that gather together and collect like real phenomena so that it can be studied and examined. And it's like that act of gathering is what brings those things together so they can be studied together. And then the process of doing that allows us to refine the what we're gathering under that term, or we might like alter the term itself to reflect new things we've learned or whatever, right? So I was just like having this argument recently, about like gender shit, which is like what I'm always arguing about people with. But it just like comes up that like people are saying to me like, oh, do you not think that autism is real? Or like, do you not think that ADHD is real? And it's like, well, no, I understand what like that they are words which refer to a real phenomena. It's like also there's also like a social history of how these terms have developed and how they like interact with that phenomena as like part of our process of trying to understand and address it. And but it's like but like I feel like the average, this is what I mean by like conceptual literacy, is like that like these things are like thrown around within like popular discourse, and no one makes these distinctions ever. And like smart people, I genuinely do think that like there are people who are genuinely smart, but their like thinking is kind of constrained by like the fact that these distinctions aren't made, and it like drives them into these kind of cul-de-sacs, and they're like they can't kind of think outside the box because what they believe they're dealing with concretes. They believe they're dealing with like concrete things. So as long as you believe that, you're inherently like pointed in the wrong direction.
Well, people like, it's like people are acting like there's like a lab somewhere with test tubes like
that contain pure mental illness.
No, exactly. Like there's a test tube, with distilled autism in it. Like a 2 liter of Mountain Dew.
They isolated the atom. They're like, this is the atom of autism.
Well, and it's interesting because there's kind of a literal example of this a little bit, which was like the serotonin theory of depression, right? And that shit gets completely blown out of the water because obviously this stuff is, well, anyways, I don't even want to get too specific about it, but it's hilarious. And one of the big problems people have, and I'm not even saying this to invalidate anything necessarily, but just to your point, psychology isn't like a hard science,
right?
Yeah, and like none of
I'll tell you another thing, which is like, so I got a friend of mine. He's quite a bit younger than me. But he's a good friend of mine. He got this kind of like diagnosis, and that basically kind of like reflects these sort of patterns of behavior that he's exuding, right? And it's like, I care about him a lot, but I worry about him being kind of exploited by this sort of like, I don't know, this kind of like mental health ideology, because I feel like that he is receiving kind of poor guidance with regard to how the world is supposed to treat him as a person who now identifies as having like diagnosis X.
Yeah.
100%. Because like, he says this stuff like, oh, like, this is like a physical thing in my brain that I can't help. This kind of thing. And it's like, so
it creates a direct identification with the issues that they're experiencing, and so then they can't cleave themselves from them at all.
First of all, it's like you can always exert some kind of responsibility over the situation, right? And it's like, fine, you may notice yourself falling into these patterns of behavior. That I'm not saying that that's not like a challenge or whatever. Like, first things first, though, that this diagnosis, again, it's not like he hasn't received a brain scan, that's like revealed irrevocably that this particular physical, like quirk exists in his mind, right? He's just been given this diagnosis, and that diagnosis obviously just refers to a collection of patterns of symptoms, and it's like, but the other thing is, that he had some like trouble at work, and they basically it wasn't his like full-time job, it was just like a side thing. I don't want to reveal too much about it, but like, he was like kicked off this part-time thing, and they were like saying to him like, oh, we're just worried about, we just don't think you're in the right place mentally for this kind of thing right now, and it's like, what I said to him later was like, you have to understand that anything that removes responsibility from you removes responsibility from them for getting rid of you, and like, I think young people are like, kind of being encouraged to believe that if they kind of like identify as one of these things, then it's like this sort of it's part of this like system of licensing, right?
It's like credentials.
It is literally is a form of like credentialism. Like, you have, this is the thing about like the kind of like ideological structure of our times, right? Is it's so like heavily dependent on these ideas of like expertise, credentials, licensing. I mean, even this is probably well-trodden subject matter for all of us now, but like, it even like extends into like identity politics, right? Because like the premise of identity politics is like that the minority is like the expert on his or her situation,
right? And it's viewpoint stuff.
Yeah, and it's structured in exactly the same like relationship of authority, where you have like an expert class who you need to listen to, and it's like problematic if you do your own research, all of this kind of stuff.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting on two fronts, which is this ties a lot into a discussion that COH and I had last week about like the Civil Rights Act, and just like the idea. I mean, obviously you're not in the US, but like I'm sure it's probably not that different. If you have like the workplace thing, it's a perfect example, right? If you get this diagnosis, you get to become a member of like a legally protected class, right? And that's a humongous thing, and it also creates kind of an incentive to do that, right? Because then you get to kind of have you there's an incentive. I don't really need to explain that, right? And then the other aspect of it, which I'm of course fucking just like have the gerbil in my brain is dying right now and I can't even think of it. Oh no, it's also just like, you know, when you're talking about credentialing and everything like that, like, you know, that person gets fired from that job, right? And they word their firing them in the particular language they do. In my mind, I immediately think for liability reasons. And then second, you know, because, you know, he or she, whatever, can't ever be, you know, exposed to like failings, their own personal failings in ways in which they can grow and things like that. And these identity categories you're talking about are like a way of like inventing value for the individual, right? Like I have this value in this way, as opposed to like, you know, religious communities can just say like, you were created by God, you have value, God loves you, that's your value, right? Instead of instead of this credentialing thing where you're like, I'm
Yeah, but it doesn't. The problem is though, it doesn't actually make anybody like feel good, and it like,
no, it doesn't.
What it does is it kind of creates like affordances for people, but the other side of it
gives
though,
people justification, I guess.
Yeah, but then the other side of it as well is that, like, you know, the other side of it that I think is exploitative is also that just in the like the like texture of real public life, right, which is not like something that is as kind of ideally smoothed out as these kinds of like, I don't know, like therapeutic worldviews would like to imagine. You know, there are going to be like social consequences for like introducing yourself to somebody as having some kind of like diagnosis or whatever, and you know, like maybe that's wrong, but at the same time, you know, and this isn't my friend's example, but like, you know, if somebody is like schizophrenic or something, I think it's perfectly reasonable for other people to kind of factor that into their you know, interactions with the person or whatever, right? So it's like, I don't think it's like reasonable to like place this demand on people in society to like you know, and it's also just not realistic. Like, people always will, all these things will always affect how people treat you, you know,
Right.
and so it's like there are these like specific spheres or spaces that are like under those particular social rules, right? And they exist within a certain like class strata. They exist within the sort of like work culture of certain spaces, you know. And also they exist within the sort of like interpersonal culture of certain friend groups, I guess, who are like, you know, like have a particular subculture or whatever, right? But it's like, you know, I see this thing as well when people are like, you know, there's this like idea of I mean, this is like opening a whole other can of worms, right? But like, just to get, like, simplify the scenario down, right? Some man opens up emotionally in a way that ends up being kind of deflating and unattractive to his girlfriend, which does happen, unfortunately. She is like turned off by it, and then, you know, he's upset, and the like response he gets from, you know, the sort of like positive masculinity guru people is like, oh well, she was doing toxic femininity, you should just like dump her and go and meet somebody else, whatever. It's like completely, you know, it's absurd. It's like completely unrealistic. It's not addressed to anybody's like real life, right? Because in real life, like, relationships are complex and people are less than ideal, and you don't get to pick and choose. You know, it's not that simple. You just go, oh well, you've said this problematic thing, I'm gonna like, you know, I'm just gonna go and select another girlfriend from the girlfriend store or something like that. That's just not the way life works. You have to like meet people halfway with their like, you know, unideal responses to things sometimes. And the other side of it is like, well, you know, maybe she has good reasons for feeling that way. You know, if she's like looking towards you as like a provider of stability and a provider of, you know, of kind of an emotional neutrality that makes her feel safe and comfortable, right? then maybe that's why she was responding that way. So if you have like empathy for her, you kind of understand that she's not like, it's not like something where she's internalized like stereotypes about how men should behave or something, you know. And it's like, yeah, maybe she didn't express those things in the ideal way or whatever, but it's just like that's life, you know. Like, I just think like the people who ultimately suffer from being given this bad advice, it's like the fucking, you know, this is the thing that's really like, I guess this is my like arc at the moment, right? Is because I get, what I get pissed off by is like platitudes, you know, and I think these are things that come from like older people who aren't really having to like deal with these kind of dilemmas firsthand or whatever, but they just kind of sound like nice.
I think it's a product of a certain class of people's ideology. And I think that ideology is then kind of worked out via, you know, graduate classrooms, et cetera, into broader media structures, into the therapist office, et cetera. And then people consume that media who are maybe not a part of that strata, but they take that to be the reality that they are dealing with as well. And so they think, oh, well, if I go and get a diagnosis of being, you know, autistic or whatever, I'm going to gain these credentials in this, you know, social circle, but they don't actually belong in that social circle, and they're dealing with a different set of reality than these people are generally. And so they're expecting to be able to walk up and be like, oh, well, here's my diagnosis, nice to meet you, and then not get any consequence, not even consequence, but not have any that have no impact on the people around them. Like, people are going to take that information in, and they're going to use it to formulate their ideas about you. And that's just how it is. And unless you're in a certain class or group of people that's kind of filtered out through media and stuff too into social circles, then if you're outside of that group and those circles, then it's not going to afford you that immunity that you're looking for, or the credentialism that you're looking for by taking that title or that diagnosis or that identity.
Yeah, I mean, and then it becomes like this thing where, like, you know, outside world is like hostile, and that sort of, that like licensing institution becomes the only source of safety, because it like, that's like the institution that provides you that means of recognition, you know. And it's like something that has tremendous power over people who, for whatever reason, don't feel confident about acquiring that social recognition elsewhere for other reasons, right?
Well, it also becomes like that. It reinforces itself in that kind of like, you seek refuge in it because it instills like cognitive dissonance in people.
Yes.
Right. And then like when you are confronted with the actual reality of the world, right, you just, the tools you've been given of how to react to that are like, oh, well, this just isn't right. This doesn't, you know, this doesn't square up. And so then you'll just keep going back to therapy. And I mean, one of the things that just is so interesting to me about therapy in general is just like how it's used as a tool of constructing truth, right? That's like definitely I mean, even in our legal system, right? Like, you know, declaring someone insane and, you know, and shit like that. And the stuff you're saying, like about your buddy, is really interesting to me, because I'm having a similar thing going on right now, where I've got a buddy who's going through a breakup, right? And it's not a particularly good one, right? And he's talking to us, and it's funny because I'm running into the same thing you said of like, I don't want to, you know, I want to respect this person's boundaries, so I'll talk vaguely, right? But
sure, yeah.
He's not really maybe navigating the issue amazingly, but you know, who does when it's a difficult situation. But he, you know, he's talking to me and he's like, oh yeah, like, you know, I'm talking to somebody now, I'm getting some help for it and everything. And something that just makes me really uneasy about this is that it's just like, that's just a normal fucking part of a human life, right? It's like living through heartbreak. And
talk to your friends about it, bro. Like, you know what I mean, or your family.
No, exactly. Like you know what I hire? Well, I actually literally don't even do this, but like, if I had more money, I would hire an expert to, you know, sort out my taxes, right? My taxes, I wouldn't say are like a natural human experience, right? I don't need to hire a fucking professional to help me deal with like a broken heart. You know what I mean? Like I get like those are, and I guess like, and I don't necessarily, I don't want to go too bold. I want to get a little more specific in it, just in that like I wouldn't be as strongly opinionated on that if I didn't also view those experiences as like incredibly constructive for a person as an individual.
That's
right?
what life's about, dude. It's just having those different experiences, and that's how you construct a life, and like that's how you learn and you grow and you become a good person.
Exactly. It's like the mental and emotional equivalent of just being like, I'm out driving and I'm like, no, I don't want to use the navigation app because I want to like learn it myself a little bit and like have the path be my own, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
You know, it's like I think that like, you know, again, like therapy itself has kind of become this sort of you know, it's almost become like a kind of rhetorical thing, or it's almost become like a shorthand for this like, you know, therapeutic like worldview or something. Which, and I think that what characterizes that worldview, it even isn't so much to do with like the value of therapy as a kind of discrete act, although obviously it does give that tremendous importance, but it's more about the way that it like evaluates things in terms of their ability, like in terms of their kind of therapeutic value, and that it becomes like the dominant way in which their like social worth is kind of adjudicated. So it's like, you know, the purpose of art becomes like therapeutic, for example. Like, does it have enough like good representation? Will it make people like feel good about themselves? All of this kind of thing. I think like you know, like when I was younger, I went to see like various therapists, and it wasn't like neoliberal brainwashing or anything. It wasn't like super deep either, and there were like kind of shitty ones. Some of them were kind of nice or whatever.
Right.
Like something like CBT, you can make that sort of like the cognitive behavioral therapy thing. You can make that kind of standard, like Marxist argument against it, that it's like, you know, that not everything is like negative rumination, or like, you know, not everything is like reducible to some kind of like bad thought pattern.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think that's basically true. Like, it's not like this kind of magic bullet or whatever, but it's also just kind of functionally helpful. And it's not, I don't see like CBT as necessarily this pernicious thing, you know.
It's funny because I 100%, just a quick interjection. I 100% agree. Like my experience has basically been the exact same thing. Like, went to a couple therapists growing up, and yeah, I wouldn't say that it was anything super crazy, though I would add, I think it can be kind of like smoking weed or something. I think it can be like a little bit hard to spot where it can be bad, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah.
When I was like getting sober, because I had like a drinking problem, I did CBT, and that was like helpful, right? I mean, like I think it's probably pretty neutral to just like explain to people good meditation habits and like and ways to just like, you know, I don't know, break thought patterns. You know, that's it can be pretty. I 100% get you. I didn't mean to interrupt there. I was
no, sure, but then I think that what is like kind of like like really deeply unpleasant is when it becomes this sort of social obligation for your mental health or whatever. Like, it becomes this other thing. This like oh man, there's some really good essay that's all about this. I can't remember what it's called. I'll see if I can kind of get it up. But basically, it's about like this kind of construction of like the neoliberal identity as a bundle of skills, right?
Yes.
As this like, this is like what your identity is
a LinkedIn account.
Just this ability to acquire skills. But the way this translated into social life is that, like, you know, it's not enough to just not be racist. You have to become skilled at being anti-racist. So that means you have to attend all these workshops or whatever. It becomes like a kind of professional skill you have to acquire within a sort of expertise hierarchy. And, you know, it's like when you just see this kind of like social expectation, like, oh, he's not in therapy. Like, that's like the most disgusting, you know, that is really vile policing of somebody's like mental life. Like, it's disgraceful. How can you say that to some? You know, I just think people have no idea how like cruel and insane they sound when they say things like this. To me, at least, like
it's pretty wild. It's definitely, it's like a high tier like group sorting mechanism.
Yeah.
For sure. Like it's the like, you know, if you're not in therapy, then like I can probably guess the next 20 things about your opinions and shit like that. I've literally seen a bunch of people's like resumes that list. I mean, they don't list like I'm in therapy or whatever, but like just the shit you're talking about of that, like, you know, people literally list on their fucking resumes like anti-racist work.
Holy shit.
Like, yeah, it's wild, dude.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of. I mean, that was always my objection to all of that stuff from the very beginning. Has always been that it's like a kind of professionalization of something that should just be, like left to people's own innate sense of indignation, which they have. Like, most people have a sense of indignation that's kind of responsive to things going on in the world. And it's really like, it's the professionalization of these good impulses involves kind of torturing them, you know, and abusing them. And people like submit to it because they like naively believe in their, you know, in their like genuine, good, true, ethical impulse that it's like the right thing to do. Like, it's that like, too is another form of like exploitation, you know? Like, I mean, people, we really don't know. Like, people are being kind of exploited emotionally and psychologically on like a mass scale, right? That's like the kind of, you know, most important thing to understand about society and popular culture at the moment, right? Like,
Yeah. Positive human characteristics of just being like a basic good human being are being like deterritorialized from the human and then reterritorialized into capital. And so like what's happening essentially is this like professionalization of these individual traits. And when it's funny, we were talking about therapy and therapists just a moment ago. That's a very stark example, because like what Slav's example was of the breakup and going to a therapist. You should just go and talk to friends about that. And those types of conversations should be organic social things that come up in a good community, back and forth between individuals, because that's part of the human experience.
Wait,
and, like,
but
that's what friends do.
COH, us as, you know, me as his friend. I mean, I'm not a professional expert.
Right, of course. And so it's been like, because of a combination of like people being pushed to the edge and alienated and not having a lot of friends that they feel close to, or not a lot of friends in general, or this warped idea of what friendship is and stuff, and like what just basic human responsibility is, it's been like kind of outsourced from people into capital. And so instead you have to go now pay and be a part of this like kind of market in order to just get those same social things that people should be getting from each other. Now it's like you got to go and pay an individual therapist to, you know, get all that from them, or you got to go and like get training in anti-racism so you can put it on your bio, or you can like offer it at your, you know, your place of business.
I mean, they, you know, these like people like Robin DiAngelo explicitly say in their books that they think that racism should be demoralized or like amoralized, right? Like they see it as a non-moral thing. Like it's completely, everything they do is completely sort of procedural and like managerial. It's not, you know, it isn't like that. This is the kind of thing that like catches normal people out when they encounter it for the first time, because they correctly, in my view, like ascribe moral value to these like states of being.
Of course.
Right. And so that's like the source of cognitive dissonance for them when they're told like, oh no, you are racist, you know, or whatever. And they're like encouraged to basically like amputate this part of their like psychic self, you know, like this, like the part of them that ascribes moral value to things. And like it's like a kind of this like grotesque form of like administrative surgery that they have to like go through to convert them into like a sort of professionalized anti-racist.
Doing the work. It's all doing the work, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's
I
one of the
was
funniest. Oh, did you just?
no, you go ahead. Yeah.
No, you're good. It's like that's one of the funny things about like white fragility, that D'Angelo Broad's book, right? Is like is it's all about the negative reactions she's getting from people who like who are specifically like forced to sit through like seminars at work and be like accused of racism, and she uses that as like an example of the kind of, you know, just this forcing this on people, and kind of not kind of understanding. It's like it's like she's an alien. It's like she's an alien, and she just doesn't actually understand like what a normal fucking human reaction would be to this. Which I guess kind of makes sense when you're talking about how like it's completely amoral in this view. When like obviously any well-adjusted person is not going to fucking look at it that way.
Yeah, that's tism.
That is tism. That's female autism. Is that
Robert D'Angelo is a female autist?
There is a weirdly sociopathic emotional texture to the writings of people like Robin DiAngelo or other people, and you see this in other areas that I think have been kind of like captured by a, you know, or like, I don't know the right term is, if there's basically a canon of accepted views that are sort of regularized and adopted by everybody within the organization, and it's like this weird kind of there's a weird undertone of like learned helplessness to it. There is like a weird like lack of sort of human liveliness that lets you know that a piece of writing is like animated by a self. You know, there's like a lack of some sort of vital human quality to it, because it is just so like repetitive, and it's actually a quality that I think just comes from the fact that like there is literally no, you know, consciousness within the text, right? Like there's no, it's almost like, you know, if you say something, if you like speak a sentence, then we sort of take for granted that you have a sort of internal subjective understanding of the words that you're saying. But with these like kind of there's something so like mechanical about that sort of like regularization of discourse, where it sounds like it's like this human speech equivalent of like ticker tape or something. You know, it's just like being produced mechanically, and the people saying it don't seem to give any indication of having any curiosity as to the meaning of what they're saying, or how it like fits into a broader like social world of human meaning. You know?
Yeah, it's just scaffolding. Like it's just like doesn't actually have any like conscious real thought into it. It's just like scaffolding meant to contain like this like word policing kind of structuring.
But it's kind of like you also just see like there's this kind of classic image that just reoccurs now, like on Twitter or whatever, where you'll just see like a classroom or something, and it will just say like, you know, gender is how you feel inside, and sex is what you're assigned at birth or whatever. And it's just like, no one has any idea. Like the people who write that on the board don't have any idea what that like piece of quote unquote knowledge is grounded in. Like they literally don't know. Like no one fucking knows. It's just like this free floating repeatable bit of like pseudo information. And it doesn't even occur to them. It's like, this is what I mean when I say that like people are like not conceptually literate. It's not, it doesn't even like stand out to them as strange that this is just being asserted without any kind of like, you know, grounding in anything, right? Or that is absent. Like that isn't, to me, like, is the same way that when people start talking about like the science or whatever, it's like there is a kind of like autistic weird thing in my brain that's like when I read something like that, I'm like, oh, that term hasn't been clarified, like this person isn't specifying what they mean by this, blah, blah, blah. And it like it's almost like a kind of sensory discomfort on a very small level, because I'm just like that's like, you know, I don't mean this in like a woke way or whatever, but it's like that's like problematic, you know?
Yeah, like
there's-
something's not squaring up. Like there's
it's
just
not squaring up. Like, but I
Yeah,
just feel like people now just don't have any sense of that. Like they're like, oh yeah, like these are like they're thinking with like these received terms. They're all just given terms, you know.
well, that's also what I mean. One of the problems that has caused that is just that like people aren't allowed to even have a personal intellectual relationship with these concepts because
Yeah.
like if you ask too
Yeah.
many questions, then like that's a moral failing, and like
Mhm.
the kind of crowd will just completely shit on you. And like, and you think about this with like I think about this really often with like, you know, I'm out of the game. I'm like getting married. I'm good. I like found
Nice.
a good one. Fucking I don't have to impress anybody anymore, right? But if you're a young guy, right? I mean, your ability, not your ability. You're like need to like get uppity and have things make sense, and to have like a personal relationship with ideas and thoughts is in direct conflict with your ability to like to ensure that you won't fucking die alone.
Oh well, I
Right?
mean,
Like,
if you were like a young man, like growing up through the 2010s, you basically had any sense of like intellectual curiosity, or feeling that you were owed an understanding, like you know, you were owed the right to understand the views you were expected to hold.
yeah.
That was just completely like crushed out of you by like just this kind of like total flooding of the social media environment with like, you know, anti-mansplaining, like general anti-young male, like anti-intellectual male curiosity, all of this kind of stuff was just seen as like, you know, you're just like, it was basically, you got the message that it was unwanted, you know, that
Yeah.
it wouldn't be respected or treated or ever taken as sincere, ever taken as like evidence of sincere curiosity, or even like, you know, intellectual responsibility. It was always like this evil ego male thing that had to just be like completely like put down and destroyed as quickly as possible. You know, like I
Right.
think now that stuff has kind of washed away a little bit. I think we've kind of forget just how like viciously like anti-male the sort of like mainstream internet culture, especially if I think it was really intense around the middle of the 2010s.
Yeah.
You know.
Yes. That, I mean, that's when you kind of got the like well, it's funny because like I was never a big gamer, but that's when you got the like Anita Sarkeesian feminist frequency Gamergate stuff was like right around then. And you know, people like to kind of play up the meme that kind of like got the ball rolling for all of this, right? The joke of like, you know, domino falls of you know, some lady doing a Kickstarter for a feminist video series, and then Donald Trump gets elected or something. Yeah. Right? But that's actually, it's funny you said that, because one of my takes when I left Barbie a couple years
Holy shit,
time dilation, right? A couple weeks ago, was that it felt like it was from like 2017 or something. Like it just it felt like quaint.
Some people have said that. I quite like Barbie. I thought it was quite good. Like I understand there's that whole kind of thing in the middle where America Ferrera is like doing her speech.
yeah.
Which is a bit annoying and stuff. I kind of feel like
it's like the thematic payoff of the movie.
To me, that felt like an obligation, and I don't know if I'm like trying to read too much kind of baseness into Greta Gerwig, because there's a kind of like feminist quality to Barbie that I'm not entirely, you know, like disrespectful towards. Like I think you know, there's the kind of within the sort of gender war type thing, right? There has to be this like, I do think there has to be this kind of reciprocal tit for tat, where both sexes need a moment to like bitch about one another. But even beyond that, like, I think the Barbie movies, what it has to say about feminism in the final assessment by the end of the movie is that it's like a human imaginative artifice. So while it can have some value, it's always like lower than the human imagination. You know, like that was
Yeah, well,
my
because it's like relational, right? Like it like relies on the other being like the Kens.
well at
And
the end. Ruth Handler, the as she's portrayed in the movie, says to Margot Robbie that like human beings invented dolls and invented patriarchy to make the world more comfortable, which is, first of all, like, it's astonishing that the film would take that kind of emotionally sympathetic a view towards like quote unquote patriarchy,
Mhm.
because there's a kind of acknowledgement there that like on some level, like, the patriarchal society is like a cope. So there's
Sure.
like this
Yeah, yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like weird kernel of sympathy for the patriarchal men there, which I think is like very kind of gracious. But I think that she says dolls and patriarchy, and I don't think the film's view of dolls is negative. So I think that at this level, she's basically just saying that like she's sort of treating these things neutrally, and I think the implication is that feminism is another one of these kind of artifacts. Like she's basically saying, yeah, like dolls, feminism, like intellectual objects as well as physical objects. These are things that are created by the mind, and we create them to try and help our lives, to help us organize things, to help us process information. But we're always like higher than those things, and that's why Margot Robbie, in the end, she goes out into the real world, which is supposed to be like, that's like the bad, catcalling world, right? Like where there are sexist builders and stuff. But she still chooses it in the end because it's also real. And I think that's actually really counter to the sort of like therapeutic worldview of like, especially the pop culture that was like really heavy in the late 2010s, like BoJack Horseman, Rick and Morty, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Like, which is so like ultimately kind of retreating
Yes.
in their attitude towards the world, and
It's
Barbie.
but BoJack Horseman is very solipsistic. Like it's 100%.
It's trapped within the sort of endless millennial self-critique, and that's like the one thing that will like really characterize, in my opinion, like millennial art when we look back on it, will be that it was trapped in this neurotic cycle of self-criticism, and Barbie doesn't do that, and it easily could, because it's actually tangling itself up in so many strands of and it does sort of deconstruct itself in certain ways, but at the end it does make a very straightforward like decision about like what Margot Robbie has to do, so yeah, I think Barbie's, I do think that it does seem like they're trying to make it into like a gender wars object now. I think that they were disappointed that it was so positively received by men. I think they wanted men to feel resentful and bitter and fragile about it. And I think that instead it was like kind of like good vibes Ken, it's like good vibes Kenergy, right? So like there's this kind of effort to like manufacture. I saw this article that was like, oh yeah, like women are breaking up with their boyfriends after seeing Barbie. And it's like the message is supposed to be, if you're a guy, like the subliminal programming is supposed to be like, we need to do something about this fucking Barbie movie, otherwise like it's turning the women against us or something,
That was I mean that's kind of what I was talking about, right? Of just that whole like the discipline, women need to discipline their men.
Yeah, it is like that.
It's funny. I love that I'm getting this perspective, because I fucking hated Barbie so much.
Really?
Dude, oh my god, I hated it. I thought it was a hateful movie. I thought it was so loathsome, and I thought that it was just arguing with itself in the end.
No, I know. I mean, there are like I do get it, because like there are irritating moments, and I think that like the Barbie deprogramming scene doesn't like work on the film's own terms, kind of thing, because like why would the Barbies by definition don't have any knowledge of the like contradictions or difficulties of living up to like, you know, female identity or whatever,
Right.
because they're already created as it.
Oh, right.
So it's like, why would that speech that America Ferrera is giving have any effect on them? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
I honestly felt well, and this is I'm being authentic when I say I like hearing the other take on it, because I think I think you had a genuinely solid take on it. I think just that ending for me of where she basically just like meets God, right?
I like that.
Yeah, she meets her creator. To me, one of the problems with that is that it becomes so abstract that it almost just becomes like a canvas for anybody to get anything they want out of it, basically. And it's just kind of like, but I don't know. It's funny. I
know what you mean formally, but this is like where I've seen people describe it as being a bit kind of like a YouTube essay or something, which I think is fair.
Well, it's so didactic. Like well, go ahead. I don't mean to cut you off.
Well, you know, I see a lot. Like the one thing I really, I don't know, like I think is kind of revealing or just kind of dumb is like that how like it's one of those moments where I kind of had this thought after seeing it, where the term male ego is basically like a euphemism for emotions.
I saw you make this post and I loved this. I was thinking about this quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, like, so if you're like a guy and if someone wants to like hurt a guy's feelings, but you know, I'm presuming she doesn't want to feel bad about it, she will just say that it's like hurting the male ego. Like, oh, I hurt his ego or whatever. And you're supposed to take from that like
you're doing the work.
Whatever like emotional investment this guy has is like in something, you know, it's like in his status or whatever, right? Or like in just something that's like not really important or not really worth.
It's maladjusted. It's not
maladjusted inherently. Yeah. Like if you're a man, then your emotional life is like regarded by society as kind of inherently like maladjusted. And like inherently kind of you know like concerned with the wrong things. Yes. And there's like very little thought given to like, I mean, I just feel like, you know, if you're like playing a song for a girl on a guitar, I do think, you know, that's actually quite a beautiful, lovely thing to do.
That's so funny you brought that scene.
I think up. I don't know. I'm just gonna go out and defend it. I don't give a fuck. I mean, this is like no one knows what fucking emotional vulnerability is. But emotional vulnerability is like saying that, like, no, I do think it's sweet and nice to like play a song for a girl on an acoustic guitar. You know,
right?
Like, I think that's like a nice, cool thing that men should do. And I think that this whole idea that like they're just doing it because they're so like self-absorbed and they're in love with themselves and it's all about their ego. It's like obviously just pure rationalization. It's just pure cope. Like, okay, if you find it boring or whatever, fine. That's like not your fault. I'm not saying it couldn't be boring or unpleasant, but like fucking grow some balls and just admit that you like, you know, you know, that's like what's going on. But it doesn't mean that the guy doesn't mean it sincerely,
right.
You know, or so yeah, it does. The movie does like participate in some crass. Like, sorry, you go ahead.
Oh no, you're like it's literally just the like it's just the like I'm not confident enough to just tell people that like I like don't want to watch this 8-minute long YouTube video that they're showing me or like playing for me on the guitar, and so I'm gonna get mad about it and make it seem like I'm gonna over intellectualize it, and somehow just make it actually like they're narcissists or something. You know, you're entitled to just not, you know, want to experience that. That's fine. You know,
if there's a guy who thinks that you're interested in him, and then you like deliberately play with his feelings and try and make him jealous, that's like his ego isn't the problem. You know, you know, like Like, I just feel like that's obvious. But like, I don't know. I think that people are fucking afraid to say things like this because they don't want to be seen to be like whining or complaining, or which is like the emotional catch-22 that men live within, and it
Well, it's
isn't.
we read like the Burnout Society by Byung-Chul Han recently for like one of our kind of like show book clubs.
Oh
and,
yeah, yeah.
and like just kind of this idea of like hold on, my screen just went on standby, and of course
Oh yeah, mine did that.
no. And do you have that moment where you're like, oh fuck, like my computer just turned off? It's never done that before, but it just did it anyways. No, just this ability to say no, right? Just to be able to like just say no to people, and like and I think that there's this, and at this point I'm going beyond Barbie at this point, but like I think that like convincing so many women that like men are just this thing that's inflicted upon them throughout their lives, or just to anybody about anything, right? It creates this thing where it's like you can just say no to things, but short of that, like your inability to just say no to something can never be about this excess positivity that you feel you have to exude. It has to be like this, like almost kind of violence committed against you or something. That's like this terrible imposition on you, as opposed to just literally being like, no, like I just don't want to do that thing. That's fine, and people that can say no to that, even like I remember like at points in my life where maybe I was like a little bit less aware. And here's a perfect example. This is a buddy who like I still have, that like great friendship and everything. And I remember a few years ago, I like lent him a comic book that I liked. I lent him like Luther Strode or something, and he reads like half of it. And I come back over to his house to like hang out, and he's like, "Oh, you can have this back." And I'm like, "Oh, like, well, you didn't finish it?" And he's like, "I just didn't like it." And like that's a completely fucking normal thing to say. And I remember just like being shaken and just being like, wait, like you can't just say that you don't like this book that you read half of and then just not want to continue reading it, right? And it's just that like people need to fucking say yes constantly, or like that, like in my fucking pea brain at that time, I was probably just thinking like, oh no, you were supposed to say like, oh yeah, you liked it, and then lie about having finished it or something, what I mean?
But, I mean, you're probably like you're registering like a really low level sort of social transgression within the kind of like framework that up until that point was like normal to you.
Yep. Which doesn't mean I'm an idiot or anything, right? But it is.
No,
you're a dumbass slove.
Yeah, well, okay, there it is. See, and this is the podcast dynamic. This is why we need it.
Gotta throw in a little negativity when you can.
No, exactly. You have the power to say no. No, anyways, yeah. It's just interesting, and it's worth examining.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think things like that are actually, like the problem now isn't really that men their egos are too big. It's just that they don't have. The problem is like literally the opposite. They don't have big enough egos. They don't have like secure egos that are like, strong enough to like register confrontation in a healthy way. Like that seems. I mean, that's like been my experience growing up, is like learning how to, like not be intimidated in new social situations, not like learning how to not be intimidated by other men, not feeling like threatened by them, and obviously it's very, very easy to fold those observations back into a kind of like pop feminist interpretation or like critique of masculinity or whatever, but that isn't really it, because actually there was nothing necessarily pathological about the behavior that was threatening to me. Like it actually wasn't violent or intimidating in intention or effect. It was just that I hadn't like learned how to effectively respond to it, and I didn't understand it. But as soon as I kind of understood the emotional logic underlying it, it wasn't really scary anymore. I mean, obviously these things, they take a bit of like practice and like getting used to and stuff. But you kind of
and
realize,
obviously it takes hundreds of dollars to have like your thoughts and
Oh,
feelings
yeah.
mediated to you by a trained professional, obviously.
yeah. But I mean, are they going to say to you though, like, I mean, I guess like a good therapist would say that, right? Like they would say like, are you sure that this person's behavior was like, intentionally trying to like frighten you, or, I mean, assuming that the person's behavior wasn't, and it was like, the situation was relayed accurately, like it'd be a bad thing for them to just like validate someone's endless suspicions towards the world. Right.
Right. Have you considered that actually you're not paranoid enough?
Yeah. But I think like, yeah, I mean, I look at my like friends, I don't know, like the men in my life, I just think actually the problems that people attribute to us, or the problems that people presume to want to like treat us for, right, or the things that people even want to have compassion for us over, are really nothing to do with us. Like they're to do with their like fantasies of of helping, and their role in what that would be.
That's an interesting point, and I might kind of miss the point a little bit here, but it just is getting me thinking about like to bring it back to Barbie a little bit, right?
Sure.
Of like, instead of actually like grappling and wrestling with like problems as they like actually exist, you're like focusing on shit that's just this kind of abstraction that you've kind of socially picked up that maybe doesn't actually, connect with your actual life at all, or your experience at all. And I remember like leaving the theater, and I went to see it with my fiance, right? And I remember just like kind of having this like realization of just being like, man, like if this was like a few years ago, a number of years ago, and I was like still single, and like I wasn't just like living with a woman and like had a good relationship with a woman and feeling confident and secure in that way, and I was still in that position of needing to go out and prove something, right, establish my value to somebody, this movie would have like authentically upset me, right? Because at that point I'm then going like, oh my gosh, like this is the, it's like incel fuel. It's like incel fuel is what it's, I guess, kind of what I'm saying, right? There's this like this total abstraction of like what women are. It makes me kind of remember this post on Twitter this like last week that was like this really attractive girl and this guy's interviewing. It's one of these dumb fucking genres of just like dude interviewing. Yeah. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But he's like, hey, like, would you date a guy who made less than this number? And it's funny because the number was still comically high. But she's like, yeah, of course. Like, that doesn't matter, right? And people just being like so surprised by that, right? And it's like, you shouldn't be surprised by that. That's like the answer that like most women I've met in my fucking life would give.
Yeah, like well-adjusted people would give.
No, exactly, because like that's not just like it people aren't just like this trope that you have. People are the people you're interacting with every day, and
it does seem to be like this weird online subculture of, and it's not really like a woke phenomenon. It's more just, although maybe there's some small overlap, but there's this kind of weird like world of like professionalized dating where there are people who are like, it's almost like a kind of like grind set.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
they're like on the dating grind set, so it's like they're not like normal people.
No.
Kind of like because they're always like coming up with these like weird, and I think it's like men and women.
Definitely,
like, they're coming up with like lists of like expectations and rules for people and shit.
To be fair, women like, always do that normally, but men shouldn't do. I'm half joking. But no, 100%, and like. It reminds me of this like this Christopher Lash thing of talking about like in the culture of narcissism, this kind of the corporate world has shifted from people having like loyalty to the company they work for
Yeah.
into being like everyone's kind of like this mercenary, and there's more attention in work culture paid towards things like competition, right, and performance, and then that bleeds out into other aspects of life. And like
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like one of the biggest, most telling aspects is how obsessed people are with the concept of sexual performance, and how like historically just like strange that is, and how fucking dehumanizing that is. And I think like it totally makes sense, just having this kind of like accountant view of
Yeah.
dating. It's
Yeah.
it's almost like a video game, and it's like people are min-maxing dating.
Yeah,
Uh,
they totally are. I mean, like some people are just completely, you know, put their minds to it, and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna like try and maximize my like success in this. I mean, I think there's also like overlap with people who are like kind of selling, you know, like dating advice as well. So there's obviously that kind of commercial uh component to what's going on as well. Um, but I wanted to defend the Barbie movie a little bit though,
oh, go
just
ahead, absolutely.
because I do think like uh I do think that one of the kind of interesting things about it is I think that it could kind of only I feel like it could only have been made now where everybody is kind of burnt out on like gender and feminism discourse. And I think that there's like a kind of latent desire for some kind of reconciliation, which I think that the Barbie movie actually kind of participates in. And I think that one of the interesting things about it that a lot of people have overlooked, because some people are kind of mad about the fact that it, you know, has these characters using the word patriarchy
Yeah.
or whatever. So there's this kind of fear that it represents a kind of like completely ideologically captured movie, I think is why people don't like that. They're worried that like feminism is so taken for granted and so much a part of this movie's like worldview or whatever, that it's just sort of like embedded into it, you know, and there's no like it's sort of airless or something. But actually, I don't think that's how it. To me, it feels a lot more like um, the way these characters kind of the way the film uses the word patriarchy. It's kind of like stuff we already know. Like it's a discourse that we're already familiar with, and the film presumes your familiarity. And this
Yeah.
is what like distinguishes it from like a movie like the Ghostbusters remake or something, which from the very beginning is just this like it's not like a real movie. It's like this cultural, this like weird staged artificial event, which is like the seeing the movie is kind of redundant
Yeah,
towards it.
can I speak on that really fast, because
Yeah, yeah,
that's such a fucking interesting point, and I was just talking about this the other day. I have a buddy who I've talked to about this. It's the example I like to use is She-Hulk, right? Where, and I never
yeah,
watched that fucking
Holy
piece of
shit,
shit,
yeah.
but She-Hulk is more about the like augmented reality game,
Yeah.
like marketing strategy, kind of like what
yeah, yeah,
the earliest one I can think of is Blair Witch, but I think it came into its own more with like Cloverfield, where like you dig into it, and it's about how people are reacting to it online and stuff like that. That's the actual product, right?
yeah,
and
yeah,
and like I think that that's a really good, from a business standpoint, it's probably a really savvy way of like writing out times when like you need to just like cut on writing budget and shit, shit like that. Like it's the show isn't the actual product. The show is just a catalyst to create the real product, which is the online discourse cycles. And it's like a really, really cheap and easy to turn over like marketing strategy and product, right? Like how amazing is it if you can just get this incredible interaction with your product while not actually needing to like invest a lot of money into it or like put a lot of effort into it. Like, does that make sense?
yeah. I mean that's what kind of what like Gamergate was really about. I think back then
100%, 100%.
is that it was about like all these indie game developers who were kind of like, or and the same thing were happening with like comic book writers and stuff, right? Where like for a while there was this like thing of like woke comics where you'd see like Wonder Woman beating up a guy for mansplaining or something, and you realize like, oh, this is just a stylized version of someone's argument on Twitter.
Yes.
Like, there was a time where all the bad guys in comics were just like being given dialogue like straight from the writer's Twitter feed from people they were arguing with. So it was like the real text was like the Twitter feed. You know?
Yes.
And like the real game is like the Twitter feed, and then all the comics and games are just like, yeah, that's some bullshit that we're doing like on the side or whatever. It's not really like the main thing.
And none of it's really like very technically competent. It's just like kind of an afterthought. 100%.
But yeah, like, yeah, I mean, the She-Hulk, that's like a great example because, and it also, that shows this kind of like, when like leftists online talk about how media should be political or how all media is political, their example of like political media is always something that like gives some kind of cameo. It's like this cameo based version of politics. Yes. It's like literally the equivalent of like a Marvel crossover movie or something. Like if fucking, I don't know, like The Flash showed up in a Marvel movie and it was this big Marvel DC crossover, and you go like, oh hey, it's The Flash. It's like literally the same thing with like it's like in the Indiana Jones movie with what's her name? The Fleabag.
Phoebe Waller-Bridge.
Why
is she in everything?
And like there's this line where she's like, you know, she has some like fucking clever line about capitalism or something. It's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, you're in an Indiana Jones movie. Like, it's like, but it's not even like, it doesn't even make sense on its own term. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just this kind of like, you know, Pavlovian like wires in your brain lighting up when you recognize a word, and that was like
exactly.
That's like She-Hulk, like with feminism or something, right? It's like Barbie is like a thoughtful movie, I think, at the very least. Like it's actually meditating on feminism and like what feminism is, you know. So it obviously shares some kind of like presuppositions about you know, living in a patriarchal society and all of this kind of stuff. But I think it like there's some kind of fucking mental breathing room that it creates.
Sure.
Like there's some kind of mental space that it affords us, and actually that's like almost the one thing that, like, you know, to whatever extent the last like 10 years of wokeness or whatever could be considered actually kind of psychically oppressive. It was in the way it denied you from having that kind of breathing space to actually like reflect on your beliefs or on, you know, on like feminism or whatever it was, and allow it to actually really like participate in your own intellectual life. And that was like the horrifying thing, because we were all alienated from that really deliberately.
I think that's really well said. I think that one thing about Barbie is that I think that Margot Robbie and Noah Baumbach are good enough writers to where it was going to be hard for them to just write something that is just completely just like the MK Ultra conditioning word that makes everyone clap like seals in the audience. Like there was going to be some level of thoughtfulness, and the way I think about it is the whole kind of libtard worldview basically rests on one really big hinge point that I think about a lot, which is basically just like the actual progress, and I don't mean it in like a moralizing way, just like the fact that things in the last 40 years have changed at all, right? The changes or progress of the last several decades can never be actually acknowledged ever, or else they would understand that like a lot of the platitudes that are being said, a lot of the boogeymen that are being argued against, just the general power dynamics of modern Western society, it would all crumble if they weren't basically arguing against like a straw man 1980s moral majority caricature. And so like an actual analysis of contemporary society can never happen. And I think that exactly what you're talking about when you're saying like, it's almost like patriarchy is almost like is talked about and delivered in this movie as like a concept that's rote already, right? Like it's like
Yeah, exactly.
we're
Yeah.
all really used to this, right? We know, and like I think that right there, like really simple, is an acknowledgement of exactly what I'm talking about.
It's
That, like,
it's an acknowledgement of like historical time, you
yes,
know?
no,
Like,
exactly.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
you. What took me 5 sentences took you, 3 syllables.
No,
Exactly.
I mean, I'm totally, I'm an essay talker, but like, yeah, like, it's funny because you can actually see in the movie the moments where it feels like the writers have made kind of almost like concessions to a more like, to my mind, like crass kind of pop cultural like discourse or whatever. Like when you have the daughter going like, hell yes, white savior Barbie or something like that, right?
Right.
That feels like something to me which is just like trying to, is they're really there to almost like manage the anxieties of the audience and like reassure them that this is like a feminist movie. I think it had to be like a kind of like, almost formally, it had to be like a feminist movie. So there have to be these moments where any kind of creeping anxiety on the part of the audience that like, oh, this is developing in some kind of like complex way. Not even the audience. I mean, I have to give them some credit, but like neurotic movie reviewers who, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Like, because there was some interview where the reviewer they just like recited their like whole speech about how I think this is really great. This is a feminist movie to Greta Gerwig, and Greta Gerwig was like, I think of it as more of a humanist movie. And then the interviewer was like, I have to push back on that a little bit because
Right.
I think it's really wonderful, blah, blah, blah. And Greta Gerwig obviously had to be like, well, no, of course it's a feminist movie. But there's this like, she had to kind of like mother this person basically and be like, no, of course don't worry, it's a feminist movie. Like that has to be kind of got out of the way before we can actually have an adult discussion about it.
Yeah,
Which
like
is, I think,
you
what you
need
want
to still have your like clap like seals laugh lines here and there.
But even that moment in the movie, Margot Robbie as Barbie actually just says no to the girl.
Right.
It's like this weird, like slightly pointed moment where she's like, no, it was your mum who like, who showed me, or something like that. So it's like in that moment, even though the girl is praising Barbie, there's still that kind of pointed, Tumblr feminist attack on her buried in there, because this is like a spiky adolescent or whatever,
Right. And in the context of the character delivering it kind of like implies a certain like kind of,
and that character is also there to like represent that voice, which I think is fair, like the kind of adolescent feminist girl who's really like emo and misanthropic and harsh.
Well, and they even have like in the scene that everyone was making fun of on Twitter, where she's like, capitalism and at the lunchroom or at the school, right?
Yeah.
They even have that like little line where everybody's like, I hate Barbie, don't you hate Barbie? And then like the one girl is like, I kind of like Barbie, and then they're like, excuse me.
It's really intelligent. It really like it's sort of self-critical in a sort of like interesting and funny way, where like no one character is presented as being like, it would be so like unpleasant if that little girl was like, shown as this to be this like voice of reason.
She's
or something.
The moral compass of the entire movie.
Yeah, that would be really horrible. Like they have to acknowledge the actual like social reality of like teenage adolescence as well, and they do. So that's good. And then later,
she is basically like a source of conflict in the movie, which is a pretty good angle to take on it, like between her and her mom.
It's also like because the movie is about a toy. It's about like the toy in multiple, You know, it's about like the toy's significance to different people, right? And so I think the movie is quite good at like integrating all of these things together into something that's like harmonious, because I think when probably teenage girls, like, that is the age where they start questioning the sort of culture that they've been exposed to up until that point, which is like, you know, dolls and things like that. And they start developing these kind of like, you know, appropriately adolescent critiques of them that and that's like a kind of process as part of their own intellectual development. So they're kind of skeptical towards things like Barbie, right? Whereas the mum is more like nostalgic towards Barbie, and she's like assimilated that kind of teenage critique of Barbie, and she understands it all. But she also is like, there's this kind of thing going on in the movie. There's this like subtext that like, yeah, feminism is nice, but I'm like a mother and I have to fucking get this shit. I have to just live and do things, and you know, and like, actually in her speech, some of the expectations that she's complaining about are like things like sisterhood. You know,
right? The like solidarity along gender
this
lines.
idea of this idea of being like a model feminist. You know, so yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of it's like it's complex. I think it's a good movie.
This will be the last time you're ever on the podcast, just for the record.
Slav's like, all right, he disagreed with me and he's out of here.
I'm actually grabbing my ball peen hammer and I'm about to smash my keyboard. This is unfucking believable. No. I mean, it's all good stuff. I mean, you know, I still fucking hate the movie, but I will say that it's not as clear cut as a lot of movies are with this kind of stuff. And I think that, you know, my take ultimately on it, and I don't want to belabor this point necessarily, but I do think that the movie is kind of in a spiritual battle with itself, especially in the third act, because I think the third act is kind of a little bit of a mess. And I think that comes from, you know, like I said, being the product of like a couple of filmmakers that are actually like authentically thoughtful people, as opposed to, you know, like you said, like fucking Ghostbusters. Was it 2016? Ghostbusters 2016?
Yeah, 2016 Ghostbusters.
Yeah, fucking 40 years ago.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, 2016 Ghostbusters, which doesn't really have any thoughtfulness in it, right?
Also, like nobody actually wanted to see it, including the people who are defending it.
Oh yeah, no, exactly. It's just,
you know,
it's
like,
proto She-Hulk, right?
Yeah.
First is tragedy, then is farce. But yeah, no, it's
Did you see Oppenheimer?
Well, it's
Yes.
funny it was funny you just said that because I was just gonna say, I liked Oppenheimer. I'll give it a solid 7 out of 10. We talked about it last week. But if nothing else, I've had much better discussions about Barbie, which has to be worth something, because Oppenheimer was, well, okay. Did you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I just recorded an episode of my podcast with somebody about it, and I've done a Barbie one as well. But I mean, I had a great guest, but I found I didn't have as much to say about Oppenheimer.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. And you know, I liked it. I think it was a good movie.
I think it's less made for discourse. Like, I think Barbie was specifically made to be a discursive movie.
Yeah. Well, that might be damning praise considering She-Hulk.
Now,
but
now that I have my own podcast, I think that's like a good thing.
It's nice when I have content.
Fuel for the tape mills, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Will you just quickly name drop your podcast and stuff while we're talking about it and kind of sell it on us a little bit so we can get it out in front of our listeners?
Yeah, thank you. It's called Bistro Californium. Californium, like the element.
Okay.
Not California, like the state. Which is, something I should have thought about that would have been confusing. But never mind. But yeah, I mean, it's basically like, every week I have a different guest. We talk about like a book or a movie or a band, an album. Sometimes I'll pair things together that are kind of interesting. And it's just like a kind of discussion about like the themes of the work in question or what we take from it, what it means to us. It's basically a kind of comparative literature discussion, So I think of it as like a kind of almost like a talking essay between two people,
Okay.
which is probably a horrible sell. But if
Yeah,
you're
remember those
me,
things everyone loves to read and write? Essays?
yeah, yeah, exactly. But it's like an essay in the original sense of the word, where you're essaying out on a topic to get to the bottom of it.
Totally.
So you don't have to fix everything into a horrible, boring, structure. You can just like let your mind ramble a little bit.
Just riff on stuff.
Yeah, and that's the kind of fun thing about it, because like these kind of weird, like it's really also about these kind of weird synchronies that come up, or these weird resonances between things that are counterintuitive. So I did an episode a while back that was pairing Spyro the Dragon with John Keats, the English Romantic poet.
Nice.
Because like there's so much kind of pastoral imagery in Spyro, but it was also just like putting these two things together. It was amazing the amount of like weird, almost like like coincidences or connections between the two were coming up, and it ended up just being a really productive way into talking about a lot of these different topics, like the sort of significance of like the pastoral, with like Spyro's beautiful rolling green hills and all this kind of stuff. The fact that like Keats has, Ode to a Grecian Urn. That's like one of his famous odes. And on Spyro, you're like racing around, crashing into these Greek urns.
Yeah.
And like for Keats, not to like relitigate the whole episode, but like, what that ode is all about is about like it's kind of about how like this frozen moment as depicted on the side of the urn is so poignant, because it depicts this kind of perfect moment and the price of that is that nothing can change and nobody can grow old and all of this kind of thing. And so like it was actually a really interesting way into talking about like childhood nostalgia and how that's connected to video games, and the way that like a level will reset eternally because once you've completed the game, there's nowhere else for it to grow or develop. So it is like this kind of frozen world, and I think that's like really magical. I think it's really about like, setting things up for those moments to happen.
Definitely. I really like that concept of like exploring the synchronicities in between different media, pieces of media, whether it be literature or movie or music at all, especially when it's over extended time periods, like with what you're talking about.
Yeah, you don't really have time to get into it, and yeah.
Yeah, and it also brings up kind of interesting stuff where it's like, are some of these scenes kind of slightly unconsciously referencing or like kind of slightly influenced by some of these other products, even if it's not at all conscious or direct influence? Like, there's a cultural cachet that one of them is put into an earlier time than the other. And so like, how is that kind of working its way through the human mindset and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's about like, sort of high-end low culture and finding ways to appreciate both of them and seeing how they kind of speak to one another. I mean, it's funny because like some dirtbag left guy recently, like he mistakenly thought that I was like a based, like racist aristocrat or something, or like that's how I present myself. And so he was like trying to own me by talking about like, he was like, you literally review podcasts about video games, you literally like do a podcast about a children's game. And it's like, well, I played it when I was a child. That's like the basis for my aesthetic appreciation for it. But it's like these guys are always kind of telling on themselves, because I don't have any snobbery about like discussing a video game as like a serious text. Like that's like his prejudice that he's like getting pissed at.
Yeah, why aren't you discussing fucking Marx's letter to the fucking Danube or whatever the hell?
But yeah, I don't know when this is released, but on Wednesday the 10th, actually it's midnight now. So yeah, so Wednesday the 9th of August, I'll be releasing I did an episode on the band XTC. Do you guys know XTC? Yeah, like making plans for Nigel, census working overtime and stuff. So we just did a huge epic sweep through the XTC discography, and I'm gonna put out a Barbie Oppenheimer episode very soon as well.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'll end my plug there.
How long have you had the podcast going for, Yeerk?
I started in January.
Okay, so it's relatively new.
So yeah, but I've kind of more or less managed to keep an episode schedule of I think I've done one every week from the beginning of the year.
That's
like
better than we've been doing. So
yeah, no, it's yeah. I mean, you guys are both welcome to come on. I'd love to have you on.
Oh heck yeah! Thanks, man.
Yeah, we'd love that.
That'd be a blast. That'd be a blast. We were actually just talking about we were gonna do a I think sometime this week we're gonna do a discussion on Videodrome. And
sick.
Yeah, I'm honestly, man, like it's kind of cool, like doing this new project, kind of just figuring out, like, oh, well, like what are we interested in doing, and what are we interested in talking about, and
what kind of things have you been sort of discussing so far on the show?
Honestly, it's kind of been a grab bag, but go ahead, COH.
I was going to say, yeah, it's far ranging pretty much. I think we've recently kind of been getting into a rhythm of trying to incorporate like a movie or some sort of media product into an episode to kind of use, like you were talking about, to spiral out of an essay out on.
Oh, it's great. It's a great to have as like an anchor.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think we've been just kind of doing essentially what we did on the Fed post of just kind of bringing a guest on, or when we just do a solo episode, just kind of trying to cultivate an organic conversation and see where it leads mostly.
Yeah. Well, you guys are really good at that because you're so like personable and pleasant to talk to.
Thank you. I take it back. You'll have many more appearances on our show. Honestly, I'll say this: Barbie, one of my favorite films of all time.
Actually, I think it's shit now.
Oh fuck! I remember. God, it's funny. I remember talking to, I think it was Thaddeus Russell or something, who came on, and we were talking to him. And he was like, yeah, man, it's funny, like scheduling with you guys, because you guys are like the only people I've ever scheduled a podcast with that we need to like schedule around your like works, your work schedules. And I just think that's so fucking funny. There's never been a sphere of my life where like us just like being fucking normal has been a plus, but just having a schizo podcast is absolutely one of them. So that's it rules. Honestly, now I'm also just going off fumes now too, because I have like a fucking email job now, so I'm gonna turn into a fucking ghoul any minute now. I just need, I need COH to keep me
keep you grounded, bro.
Keep me grounded as a normal person.
Do you find it hard to like balance the two?
Balance what?
Like work and podcasting.
I would have it. Well, what about you, COH? Before I answer.
I think that it's at times it can be a little bit difficult to just kind of work out all the scheduling and find the time to really feel like I'm giving my all to anything. When you feel like you have a lot of different things going on, it's really great. I like having a lot going on because it makes my life feel full. It makes me feel like I have something to do. I'm being productive in a way, or I'm like kind of giving meaning to my life through creating things and through like having a job where I create as well. And I think that it can be a little bit difficult to find the right time. Like I think that we've had a couple of, scheduling issues here and there, just because it's difficult to always feel like I can give my full mind to the task at hand. Like if it's a night where we have a episode scheduled, maybe it's like, if you get off a hard day at work, you feel a little bit discombobulated. So maybe you feel like you can't really go into it with a clear mind. But then also at times it's good to go into an episode that way, because it can help ground you. Like you might need to have a conversation right then to kind of snap you out of that mindset and put you into a different frame. So
that's really true.
It's kind of like how like I've had times where I'll have like a job that keeps me really busy, and I'm like, fuck, I just need to get to a spot where I don't have this and I can really get my head clear. And then I'll like and then I'll be just like totally unemployed, and I'm just like not thinking clearly at all. You
Yeah,
know?
you're like,
'Cause
oh,
I-
shit.
yeah, I have nothing going on. Yeah, I mean, COH's got a lot of music stuff going on, and I've got a wedding I'm planning on top of work and this and everything. So it can
that's
be like,
amazing. Congratulations.
well, thanks, man. I think it would honestly probably be harder to balance if our previous project hadn't been completely fucking obliterated, but as it was growing bigger. But
What actually happened to the Feb? I mean, do you mind talking about it? I don't want to.
I'm not going to talk about it on air, but we can talk about it after. But
Oh, sure. Okay.
it just it just in on the plus side, it's one of those things. We lasted a pretty fucking long time. In podcast years are like dog years, and so by that metric, we probably lasted about 60 years. But the
Switch, like you're saying, it did kind of like, I think we both needed and didn't even know that we needed it, but like a little bit of a moment of slow down, because I think, like you're saying, we both kind of started picking up things in our own personal lives completely by happenstance right around the same time, and it didn't really have anything to do with the split or anything. But I think that it kind of just coincidentally worked out that starting a new project with a slower pace that kind of happens when you're first starting out, not really being forced to like, you feel like we didn't have a good time, reaching out to people to get onto the podcast. We didn't have a lot of big guests lined up right away because we just were locked out of Twitter and a bunch of other things. And so because of that, it was less stressful. It seemed a little bit less pressure. And I think that having that kind of step back was helpful for me in my personal life with my other creative pursuits, and I think for you as well, Slav, with the things that you have going on with the wedding and everything.
Exactly. And I think we have each other's backs in that way, and so it's kind of one of those things of just like, dude, if we want to just kind of put it on the back burner and just kind of have it be going but not have it be a huge thing, it's like not, you know what I mean? It's like it's chill in that way. But now fucking back on Twitter, getting some of our friends back, growing the show again, and so I mean, I think it's weird. It's been weird, but it's been good. It's been good.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, that's nice. I'm glad that it's like building up again. Although that sounds like a really nice sort of ramp up as well, like where there's a bit less kind of pressure to get things out, and you have time to like let it like kind of grow organically a little bit on its own.
Definitely.
Yep, it's nice having something big, but something big can also be kind of cumbersome, and the weight of it can kind of swing you around. And so, kind of, switching to managing something smaller has definitely had its benefits. And like COH said, I think just like it kind of happening at a really opportune time, which is nice because now I feel like I'm coming back to this with like a much more authentic interest in it, you know?
Definitely.
Like I'm texting you today just about like, oh, like I want to do this for a bonus and we should do this. And there's definitely been times where like I would not have been thinking on that level at all. So yeah.
I mean, it's like a responsibility, but it's also like I don't know. It's so fun, just like planning things and thinking of things to do. Being like, that would be really cool. Like, it's great feeling just making things happen. Yeah, even on the small scale of a podcast.
Well, 100%. I mean, I think all of three of us are like into art, and it's just good to be making shit. And I don't. Yeah. I'll never use the word making content because I fucking hate that. I think that it's like it's horrible. But just making something, making anything, right? It's just good for you. It's good for your fucking brain. And like I used to play in a number of bands, and like that kind of chapter of my life is over. And I think that like, I think that podcasts have been like a really fun thing in that way.
I love like role playing in my own head as like the evil corporation of my own podcast, and like whenever there's like a media phenomenon coming out, I'm like, how am I gonna make this into content?
Dude, like, it can be kind of fun to do that, dude.
Yeah, like there's some good new content, like the Barbie Barbenheimer coming up. I'm like, yes, you know,
Well,
This will be
this is like part of the fun of the great dynamic that I have too, is that sometimes I kind of feel like, okay, I'm running a podcast with like a fucking bass playing like crystal dude, right? And so
well, you have to have one of those.
you totally do. Well, no, and so I get to like, and it doesn't come to me naturally, but sometimes I can feel good about just being like, all right, like how do I business this thing a bit? Because like I feel like I have a pretty solid anchor. You know what I mean? And so it is fun to just be like the evil corporate committee in your own head.
Yeah.
And I think the reason we're even saying something like that is because and I don't know, I can't totally speak for you, but it doesn't really come to me naturally. And so, well, you said that the you use the term like role playing, and that's kind of exactly what it is, right? Of just of putting on a different hat. That's kind of a departure from how I usually think.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like the most disciplined thing I've ever done, where, you know, like I'm just this like really lazy perfectionist who just doesn't ever want to do anything because it won't be perfect, and you know, so like, you know, there are like, it's been really I think good for me to just be like, yeah, like I wasn't necessarily satisfied with my performance on this one, you know, on this one I kind of talked around in circles for a bit, or I mean, obviously all my guests are perfect, but sometimes the host has problems. But
same here,
yeah. No, but yeah, it's been really good for me to just be like, well, you know, it doesn't fucking matter how I feel about it because it's going out. Like,
we talk about that a lot, about sometimes you just got to do it and put rubber to road, you know. And it's healthy to do that, and it's helpful because it wears down some of those boundaries, because it's like some of the perfectionism and stuff like that you can build up is also just like a barrier to actually doing the thing that you want to do in the long run.
Dude, this is a really interesting topic actually, because like I played drums, and that was always what I played in bands. And so I always kind of like took the back seat of watching people like kind of lead the creative process. And I remember like the first band I played in was in high school, and it was kind of this process of this person just being really, really, really hyper measured and precious about like, when are we going to play our first show? And like, when are we going to actually start recording stuff? And it never even really happened, right? It was just like tons of practicing and never actually going out and like doing the thing where you start doing the work of it, right? Which is funny because it's like the Strokes can do that, because the Strokes are like related to fucking people that work in, you know, the music industry, and so they can have like a big first show or something, right? But like, if you're just a nobody, you need to like, it's like with like how you hear comedians talk, like you need to just like go up and like bomb a bunch of times and do the thing, right? And at this point, it kind of blows my fucking mind. I mean, I don't know how long we've been doing this thing, like this thing as in just, you know, these people are sick and fed post. It's been a number of years, and like
3 years, 3.5,
3 years at least, right? And like, this is more prolific than, and I don't, you know, it's a totally different medium, so I need to qualify it this way, but like, we're prolific at this point. You know, there's so many fucking hours of us just talking. And it is just one of those things of like, of just realizing like, you know, I think people, especially like a lot of musicians that I kind of like would talk with in like the scene that I was involved in, it becomes this kind of like, well, I'm going to create something and it's going to be my moment where I'm like the you know, redheaded girl with glasses in the 80s movie, where I'm going to go up on stage and I'm going to let my hair down and take the glasses off, and everyone's going to notice I'm like a bombshell because I'm going to share my creative genius. And that's not how it works at all, right? Like, one of my favorite artists is like John Carpenter, and John Carpenter is super fucking based. I feel like COA just heard this spiel like 1,000 times.
Oh, I have, but I like it. It's good. It's correct.
No, it's based, right? He treats his job, or he treated his job, because now he's retired and he just jams with his son on guitar and watches the NBA, but and just tweets about what PlayStation games he's playing. But like, he treats it like a a craft, like he's a blue collar worker, and he treats it like a fucking job he's doing, like he's a carpenter or something, right? And like there's not
John Carpenter, the carpenter.
Yeah, hey, and like and there's no thing of it just being like, well, I'm just gonna. My mom told me I was special, so I'm just gonna open my mouth and just perfection is gonna come out. It's like, no, like it's an iterative process, and just keep showing up to it, right?
Yeah, really. Well, it's funny you say that because I also always wanted to be in a band when I was a kid, and I had.
Do you play any instruments?
I play a little bit guitar, and I kind of fuck around on, I got like a Logic Pro, so I do these
nice,
with MIDI things and stuff like that, right? So, yeah, I always wanted to start like a kind of avant-garde rock band or something. Like
Hell yeah,
type thing.
That's the shit.
But I could just never get it together, so I had all these like imaginary bands where I had like, and I was such a kind of conceptualist. Like I'd think about like exactly what kind of art I wanted, what all the song titles would be. Like, I've always been a person where song titles and album titles are very important and part of why I will like a band over another band. So, and the band name, stuff like that, I would obsess over. But I always I could never really get it together. And now it's like I kind of look back on it and it's like, well, yeah, it's because like you weren't good. You know what I mean? And it's like, but I kind of say that without like. I'm not like beating myself up about it. It's just true. Like it's not. But the thing is, if I'd recognized that then I would have known that I could get better
right
at it, and I would have actually maybe made a go of it. But my actual attitude was at the time, well, if something didn't go exactly how I wanted it to go, then it was like this kind of apocalyptic, shattering thing that would just make me give up immediately. Because I basically had this kind of binary idea of creativity where you just kind of like a spider making a cobweb or something. You just kind of like discharge it out of you in one big movement, and then it's like there and it's created and it's perfect. And you either do that or it's bad or you can't do it or something like that. And there's no so yeah, it just doesn't. I mean, like to kind of tie it in with like what we were talking about earlier and like therapy and mental health and stuff. Like, I honestly feel like the best thing that has ever occurred to me, or the thing that's like helped me most, is just like sometimes, something just didn't work because you were bad at it.
Yeah,
and it's like, but it's like now because we do have this kind of culture of identification, right? So if someone is bad at something, they think that that's like some inherent quality about them, rather than like it being this like relational thing where they can actually, you can just like get better at these things.
That's a starting point. Yeah, you know you're bad at it. You've tried. That means you've tried it, and so your foot's in the door now. And so like you just continue to. If it's something that you're actually interested in and you feel called to or pulled to in any meaningful way, then you will try it again and keep flexing that muscle, and eventually you'll build and you'll build and you'll get better. Like creativity is I think that creativity as like a force or an essence, I think is something that is kind of mystical and such. But I think that as like a ability, I think that it develops like you do any other skill. Like I think that some people may be more tapped into more creative, ideas or concepts conceptually, but you still have to be able to master the art of getting those concepts to appear physically in front of you, the actual art of creating those concepts into reality. And so you have to do the individual steps. You have to learn the instrument, or you have to learn the technique for painting, or you have to at least just go buy the fucking paint, like at the very first step. And so I think that a lot of people view it as something that's just going to happen to them, rather than something that is happening to them, but also they have to kind of nudge it out of themselves. It's not something that just kind of like plops out one day. You have to tease it out. You got to work it like carving a stone.
100%. I mean, it's like monks go and fucking spend their entire fucking lives just like meditating and discipline to achieve something, right? It's not like you don't just suddenly channel strong energy through yourself without kind of that disciplined practice of,
Right.
you know, meditating on stuff. And what were you about to say?
I was thinking it's just a kind of social thing. Like I remember just embarrassing moments from my life where I tried to do something socially and it didn't work. And it's just
terrifying.
You feel terrible about that. But then
Yeah.
in retrospect, it's like if you can understand what you did wrong, then it's actually there's a kind of weird miraculous forgiveness that descends on you.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I think that people are also very forgiving in kind of contrast to what they might believe about themselves, because most people will just kind of almost act according to the logic of the situation.
Mhm.
So even if you're a total fucking social retard at one point in your life, and you really fail with a certain group of people or whatever, and you're ashamed to show your face, if you just learn some social skills and come back and just be normal and cool, then they'll you know what I mean? People actually just respond to what's before them in the moment.
Absolutely.
I think people don't realize just how malleable the sort of social world is in that sense.
Yeah. People are on this weird mindset where you already want to be the expert, right? Experts kind of, drive all of our discourse and all of our knowledge and everything. And so you don't want to try to do something new or have an opinion on anything or play a new instrument or do whatever, because you're afraid that you're going to show that you're not an expert. Yeah. You're not the person that has the credentials. You're out of that class of magi, you're not one of them. And everyone wants to secretly be that. And so there's this very difficult thing where people want to already have mastered something that they've never picked up. And that's what keeps them from ever actually picking up the thing in the first place, whether that's, social interactions, relationships, dating, creation, art, etc., any of it. I think that's a big barrier there.
Because
go
ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was just going to say, if you're the expert at that, this or that thing, and then you do badly at it, it's then you've kind of become a hypocrite,
right?
And that's the one thing. I think this is the the last psychiatrist was the guy who made this point, but it's sort of if you have the society where there are no, there are more or less no agreed upon values, or there's this kind of basic idea that everybody has to decide what they believe and at the same time permit and tolerate everybody else's beliefs, right? Then his point was, I think that the one thing that becomes so socially unacceptable is hypocrisy, right? Because it's the way that you can kind of criticize somebody without being held to the standard you're criticizing them by. Right, because you're saying you're failing to live up to your standard, so your standard doesn't apply to me, so I don't have to be judged by those criteria. But this is the criteria that you're setting for yourself, and you're failing to uphold it. And I mean, this is the kind of thing that we see people throwing at Christians or whatever as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's the constant thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's kind of actually it's more the average Christian, for example, is probably somebody who sins all the time, but that's why they're Christian.
That's the whole thing.
That's the whole point.
Yeah. So, well, people don't fucking understand that at all. I think that there's a really simple kind of circuit that happens here when people when people fail to set out to accomplish something, when it comes to I want to, be a musician or something, which is they feel, and maybe this totally doesn't make any sense, but I've thought about this a decent amount. They feel the satisfaction of what being the type of person to play guitar would feel like. And they go oh man, that's cool. Slav that plays guitar is a cool Slav, right? I like that. That's satisfying. That feels good. And then they're okay, well, I can continue enjoying this if I actually fucking play guitar, right? But then they immediately come up with the pain and the death of that person when they need to actually go about, practicing and failing over and over again. And like Slav that plays guitar dies 1,000 deaths when he, you know, sits down and has practices where he's not very fucking good at the guitar.
That's literally what the practice is just that like torturous process of just like killing that guy over and over again, to kind of, so you can kind of make him real. Like you have to kind of kill him in the imagination to like bring him out into the real world, like iteratively. But it's like it's so kind of undignified. That's the problem with it.
Totally
really undignified and unglamorous.
I think one of the I'm sorry. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but and that's good in a way as well because it helps you have a sense of humor about yourself.
Oh, well, 100%. It's humbling, and I think maybe one of the most universal ways that dudes can relate with this is just the dude that thinks he's a stud, right? That doesn't want to go and talk to, you know, the girl across the room or something because it's a lot easier for it to just live in your mind in the abstract as opposed to actually having that like rubber meets road moment and experiencing that. And I don't know, I mean, this just reminds me of kind of what we were talking about earlier of just like the buddy I was talking about of like, you know, like let yourself experience the heartbreak, you know, don't outsource that to somebody. What are you doing? Like, this is gold. No, exactly.
Like, your life experience, basically.
Yeah, and I think that you had said earlier about like platitudes that are kind of pushed by a lot of older people that just don't even really need to experience this stuff anymore, right? And it's like don't like the suffering you're having right now is like a fucking commodity. It's like gold, right? And you're fucking throwing it away so that some like post-sexual fucking credentialed loser can just over intellectualize it and sap all the art from it. And you're robbing yourself of your youth by doing that. Stop paying a fucking therapist to rob you of your youth if you're going through a tough breakup. Unless you're literally schizophrenic. That's the qualification everyone always needs to make when they're doing this shit. Is like, except for the people that'll, you know, fucking eat their hand if they don't go to therapy or something. And it's like, okay. Anyway,
No, I mean, I was just gonna add my, you know, usual irritating legalistic clarification, being like, yeah, you know, it's like fine sometimes. It's just not like that. But you're right. It's just about like being kind of just like experiencing things appropriately. It's like really like I think that's the thing that is easy to forget is that if somebody breaks up with you, that's like heartbreaking, and it's meant to be. It's actually appropriately, you know, unpleasant.
And you're supposed to experience it too,
you're
and not like run
it.
away from it or try to rationalize it or whatever. You're supposed to feel it through, and then, you know, learn whatever lessons you need to learn about yourself, about the way you engage in that relationship, about what you want out of a partner going forward, etc. And it's like with everything,
deepens your sense of the human experience.
Yeah,
like you know.
Yeah, suffering is like God's chisel that kind of chisels away at the hulk of what your essence is until you finally get down into kind of your actual core being, like your final product. And you have to go out there and put yourself out and be vulnerable in front of other people, whether that be in intimate relationships, whether that be at in conversations on a day-to-day basis or whatever, in order to have those meaningful experiences, in order to actually, kind of chip away at what this like shell is that keeps us from actually being, actualized human beings.
Yeah, I mean, the other nice thing about that though is when you realize that it's like, like the only way to get through is through, accepting that suffering. Then there really is like no point in postponing it anymore.
And there's a certain peace in it.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, so everyone go out there and take risks, dude. Try some new shit. Stop thinking you're an expert. Stop being afraid to not be an expert.
Yeah, there's literally there's literally a reason why you walk into any like church, any Catholic church, and there's a fucking and Jesus is like on the cross, central to the entire thing. There's like a symbolic gravity to that, and it's not even rocket science, but I feel like this is a perfect fucking place to end. And I even got to plug Catholicism in the end. It's like I'm like going through the checklist now.
Yeah, I knew it was coming about 8 minutes ago when you brought it up in the first place.
Oh, let's go. All right. Well, here. Because we have to have good form here. You already gave the plug, but why don't you do it one more time? Because I feel like at the end of an episode,
Oh yeah, just to the end.
It's
yeah,
good
Plug
for
all your shit too, like your social media, your Substack, all this kind of stuff.
The Substack's pretty dead.
Okay.
I think that was called Kandrona Rays. So if anybody wants to look that up, they're welcome to. You can follow me on Twitter at P Yeerk. That's like at Papa, and then I don't know what the Y one is, but Yeerk. And my podcast is Bistro Californium. And you can find that on Patreon, on iTunes, and Google Podcasts. I'm gonna get it on Spotify imminently, so stay tuned for that. If you like, I don't know when this will be out, but I'm about to like switch podcast providers or like hosts or whatever.
Mhm.
So if you look for it on iTunes and it's not there, just wait a few days. There might be like a little gap where it's not up. But otherwise, it's on Patreon. My last episode was on Ezra Pound's Cathay, his Chinese translations with Nick Dollinger of the Beautiful Toilet podcast. And that was like a really, really cool episode. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff on there. It's very eclectic. So check it out. Bistro Californium.
Beautiful. All right. Well, let's cut it here.
Sweet. Yeah, Yeerk, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your time with us today. I think we had a good conversation and definitely look forward to many more in the future.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on, guys. It was a blast.
And that concludes this week's episode of These People Are Sick. Thank you for tuning in. If you liked what you heard, you could head over to our Patreon page, which is the home for bonus content, extra episodes, video content, access to our Discord, and more. That's patreon.com/thesepeoplearesick, and we hope to see you over there.